I am using this one. Okay. I have not planned anything. The deal I made with Ranjan is I'll come. I will answer any questions you want to ask, property related, obviously, ideally to do with auctions. I didn't know how good Jay was. That's the first time I've watched my Jay speak, and he really is obviously planning to take my job in the not too distant future. He gave you some great examples there. In fact, that very last property is a really interesting one because the Cedars in Mill Hill was one I was actually personally handling myself. It was a lady and she was an elderly woman, and her uncle lived in Australia, so I was working off two different timelines. They said to me, if I get £1 million, I'll take it, any time. So I was doing the viewings. I haven't done any viewings myself for about 7 or 8 years, but I took this one personally and I went and did all the viewings myself, met all the buyers on site, and people were driving this little lady mad. What will you pay now? What will you pay? All in front of each other. They were virtually fighting each other to get her attention. And basically what happened was she told one guy out loud, I'll take £1 million. He said, I'll give it to you right now. And then I had to sort of drag him off her and sort of say, oh, leave her alone. This is not how we do things here. And I basically convinced her. She was so excited. In her mind, she was spending the mill already. She thought it was a done deal. And I basically convinced her to leave it in the room. I said, please have faith in the auction process. Trust me on this one. I know we've got a guide of 850. I know your reserves around the 9 mark, but listen to me. I'm telling you, you can see all the human beings that have turned up here today. And that was only viewing number 1. We had loads of them. Trust me on this, buy into the model, understand how it works. Let me do my job on the rostrum, and I guarantee you we'll get you at least that mil. And of course, it went for 1.12. As I'm shouting out all the numbers, and I'm looking at all the chairs and all the people, and I'm looking at her the whole time. And as the gavel came down, she was like beside herself. She couldn't cope. And she sort of sent me all these text messages and was very overexcited. Guy in Australia wasn't fussed at all. He couldn't care less. But yeah, he's like, yeah, that's exactly what it should have gone for. I was expecting more. She was very, very, very grateful. And that was a lovely little story. I didn't even know that one was coming up. That was a nice story about how auctions, everyone thinks it's how you go and you nick properties out of them, and well, actually, this is what you're all here for, aren't you? You want to learn how to get deals. Sometimes we do our job really well, and we get like way over what the vendor was expecting. But I guess we'll flip that on his head, and you're going to want to know how you can buy properties cheap and make some money from the auction industry. So I can ramble on, or you can ask me questions, whatever you fancy. Who has a specific sort of notion that they really want answering about auctions? Yes.
Just wait, we'll bring the mic to you. Stand up and ask your question. And
yeah, hi.
Wow, you've got a strange voice. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just a question on short leases.
Short
You
leases,
see a lot
okay.
of short leases in auctions. They're obviously low prices, but there's obviously risks with that. Could you take us through that?
Yeah, so short leaseholds are very common in an auction room. Basically, like with sort of any unmortgageable property, you're talking to a kind of a slightly smaller audience. Anything sub 70 odd years on the lease is now pretty much considered cash buyer only. And people get excited. They get excited because in their mind, they're going to buy a property for a fraction of its true value, pay a lease extension cost, which sometimes you don't even know what that is yet. Sometimes we will disclose it if the vendor has given us an indication of what the freeholder has quoted, then we can let the buyers know, and then they can sort of factor that in. But more often than not, all we're told is, look, we'll serve the Section 42 notice for your buyer, so they don't have to wait for the 2 years. But it's a bit of a lottery. Have fun, see how you get on. And it sort of goes back to what Jay was talking about, which is some buyers see angles where others don't. And somebody who thinks, oh, I'm an expert negotiator and I'm brilliant at talking freeholders down, they'll value that particular flat at a sort of more keen price than somebody that hasn't got a clue what they're doing and probably wouldn't even go for it. But short leases do very well at auction, and we are always astounded by how much higher they go than when you add the two numbers together. The purchase price of this, you've got the sort of the lease extension cost of that. By rights, it should be worth about this, but people always just overpay. It's brilliant. We like that. It's good fun. Good. Vendors like that too, of course. Are we done on short leases? Yep, good.
My question was, if you, with the sort of normal estate agency process, you'll have the opportunity to say, oh, I'll buy it subject to planning permission, or can we do this with a lease before? How much of that can we realistically do in an auction?
Absolutely none of it. So the whole point of an auction is it is an unconditional sale under the hammer. So when I point at you and bully you into doing things you never ever dreamt of doing, you've paid your price, the hammer's down, that's it. You have now bought that property. You will walk to the back of the room and you're going to put down a 10% deposit there and then on the spot. There is no waking up tomorrow morning going, do you know what? I actually meant to say, subject to me getting a whole extra roof put on or all the things we were just talking about
I kind of meant before that, in the 3 weeks before.
Well, look, anything is a negotiation prior to the auction sale itself. So before we've actually got as far as the auction day, you are free as a potential purchaser to make a bid prior to the sale. Some vendors will say outright, look, I'm not interested in any offers prior, don't even bother putting them to me. But most vendors are at least curious to know what offers come forward. And of course, those offers can be subject to certain conditions being met. You may say, look, your guy's 200,000, I'll pay 3, but I want 12 weeks to complete, not the standard 4 weeks. Or you might say, I need this, that, and the other put into the contract that's only going to apply to me that no one else would get. And then the vendor will simply make a decision based on whether they feel your offer is so wonderful and that they're probably not going to get that on the day, whether they want to take that or not. So yes, pre-auction, you are free to make a bid and you can make it subject to your personal conditions. Very rarely does that get accepted. Most of the time the vendor says, yes, I'll take, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so's offer, but they walk into your office, they put down the 10%, it's like it's in the auction room, and don't talk to me until that deal's done.
Tell me if it's wrong.
Yeah.
This year, particularly last few months, the all auctions I went, 30-40% of the auction property are withdrawn because the price didn't reach to the vendor's indication price. So I would like to know, after withdrawn, what inside the story the auctioneer and vendors and then somebody sneak in? Could you tell me a little bit more story?
Sure. So there's two things. You've touched on the word withdrawn, but I think you meant unsold in some of those cases. So basically two things happen. Sometimes a property doesn't make its reserve, and that's now unsold. So any reputable auctioneer will declare that as an unsold auction lot. It didn't make its reserve, and now that's open to the public to make offers post-auction. Incredibly, we see quite often people paying more after an auction than they could have won it for on the actual day itself. General human apathy is sometimes such that people don't actually bother coming to the auction. They think to themselves, well, look, let someone else have it, and if they haven't, then I'll deal with it. They then see that it hasn't sold. We don't disclose reserves necessarily if we don't need to. And someone will say, what can this be bought for? And we'll say, I don't know, 250. Oh, okay, great. I'll walk into your office and do it. And they could have won it for 225 about half an hour earlier. So that does happen. Now, withdrawn property is a whole different thing altogether. There's two types of withdrawn properties. The first one is where we have no say in it whatsoever as auctioneers, i.e. the vendor has a legal problem. I don't know, some spouse has popped out the woodwork and declared that they're not willing to let the other half sell it, or a business partner, or some legal issue over a probate, or God knows what. So that happens where even with all the will in the world, even if you offered us 20% over the reserve price, never mind the guide, we wouldn't be able to do anything with you on it. And then there's the withdrawn lots where we have gone through the marketing process. We have carried out all the viewings. We've done absolutely everything we can to get it primed and ready for auction day. But we just know for a fact it's not going to make its reserve price. Then we are faced with a decision, and we will sit down with our vendor and we'll say to them, look, you've got two choices here. I either run this to the room, expose it, it's going to go unsold, and you are then going to have a real problem trying to sell an unsold auction lot and the stigma that goes with that. You are never going to get an offer that's going to be acceptable to you if the whole world has seen this go unsold at a much lower price. So we will advise them to maybe withdraw it, not as a commercial decision, not for any legal reasons. And what that then does is it protects the integrity of the property. It means that there isn't this negative bidding history that's acting against that property for all future sales that vendor may go through. Not for our benefit whatsoever, because more often than not, that property is taken away from us and given to another agent somewhere else. But we're always trying to do our best job for the client, the vendor, and we will often say, look, we'll sacrifice a potential fee because we don't think we're going to get it, but we want you to at least have half a chance of selling it at a later date. And that's the other type of withdrawal. So you've got two withdrawal type styles. One is fully available still after the auction. One is totally unavailable. And then you've got unsolds, which are always still available post-auction. Does that answer your question? Correct. So that's what you'll often hear me say. If I've got a reserve of, I don't know, £300,000, and there was a whole flurry of people all paying between 250 and 280, say, then we will say, look, just come to the back of the room. We weren't quite where we needed to be, but there's obviously a deal to be done. We'll get the vendor on the phone. Sometimes the vendor's sitting there quietly in the room crying at this point, whatever. And yeah, from a purchaser's point of view, you're never going to get them at a weaker moment. The second after, it's just not sold at an auction. So that is the prime time to steam in with your horrible vulture-like bids post-auction. But, that'll be their call and their decision. In terms of post-auction where the whole day's finished and, we're now in the next day or the day after, then, of course, it's just it's sort of a slightly more open discussion between you as a potential buyer and that vendor, in the cold light of day afterwards.
Andrew.
Hi.
I think this is a quite personal question, but just to check, if you can tell us, how do you get to know about the reserve price?
The reserve price, yeah. What about the reserve price?
Because that's the thing that we always look for. What's the reserve price?
Right. So the reserve price. Okay. So for those of you that have never been to an auction before, never used eBay, I've basically been locked in a basement for the last 50 odd years. A reserve price is effectively the undisclosed minimum that a vendor is going to accept. It is not the guide price. We publish guide prices in our catalogues and on the website and on Rightmove, Zoopla, etc., etc. But the reserve price is our private conversation with the vendor, and is basically the moment I hit that, that's when I can bring the gavel down. Okay. You cannot win it lower than the reserve price. Yes.
Is there a normal relationship between the reserve price and the sale?
This is a very commonly asked question. It's very relevant and very topical for the last 12 months. So there were auctioneers, very naughty auctioneers, who were guiding at one price and having reserves miles higher. This is obviously unfair on potential buyers because they've gone to a lot of trouble, they're taking time off work, they're doing some due diligence, often spending money, and they're turning up to an auction room and they're actually bidding quite a way above the guide and still not winning the property. It's going unsold. And the ASA came in and said, this is very naughty, you auctioneers must stop doing this. And we actually always had a policy internally of what we would call the 10% threshold. So all us auctioneers got together over a couple of sort of conferences, and it was determined and then enforced. It's not a legal enforcement, but it is a sort of a kind of a recommended force by the ASA to make sure that we're not wasting people's time. The guide and reserve must never be more than 10% apart. Quite often, actually, at Auction House London, our reserves and guide are a lot smaller than 10% because, in our opinion, I don't need the aggravation of fielding hundreds and hundreds of inquiries from people who have absolutely no chance or are never going to actually pay the required amount anyway. So, as I say to my vendors, they, who have used other companies maybe where they've, the downloads and the inquiries are really high, but it still goes unsold. Well, that wasn't very fun. You're better off having just 3 or 4 people, but they're all in the market to buy, and let's have an all-out bidding war rather than have the fun of seeing 50 people turn up at all the viewings, but actually they all think they can buy it at 100 grand lower than they really can. It's a complete waste of everyone's time.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm
You're
Manu
cold.
Chopra.
It's cold in here, isn't it? You've got a scarf, the jacket, the whole lot. You're going skiing over there or something.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So basically, I haven't bought a property in auction,
Yeah.
but obviously, I'd say 6 months, 9 months ago, there was this thing about you can't really get a deal. You're generally overpaying in auctions, but it seems to have reversed now. So what's your view generally of auctions up and down the country and going forward, your predictions for the next 6 months?
That's a great question. So I do 7 auctions a year down in London for my firm, Auction House London with Jay. And then I also auction for a firm called Sutton Kirsch up in Liverpool. So I see both ends of the country. I see the £300,000 upwards lot sizes that we sort of have, and then I see all the 30 grand houses in Liverpool, and everything's 30 grand. I mean, you can literally just do that and go 30. Unbelievable. 120 lots, never more than £30,000. Incredible. Can you get a deal? Well, I suppose if you pay 28 for something worth 30, you've got a deal, I guess, haven't you? I mean, it's one of those. There's lots like, in fact, Jay gave you some great examples, and you would say that Southwood was a deal, I suppose, if you don't mind buying a ton of problems. Yes, you're right. There's an overload of information on the internet. It's very hard now to, if you can see a 2-bed flat in a block of flats, and every other one sold for 250, well, you know what this one's worth. I suppose the deals are on lots which are harder to value, have slightly more potential to them, and different ways of adding value, because of course purchasers see different things. A guy with a team of builders is going to be able to do a development project a lot cheaper than someone that's never done it before, who's going to have to go and pay full top price. So, depending on what purchase price you're coming in at, it depends on whether it's a deal. My job is to never sell a deal ever. And if I sell a deal, then I've probably not done the best I can for the vendor. But of course, there's plenty of people driving around in Ferraris who come and buy properties in my auction. So they're all making money somehow. And I guess it's down to people's own aptitude, their ability to work planning departments, their ability to see an angle that no one else has seen, their sense of being able to twist a floor around and say, well, if I move the kitchen in here and do all the sort of stuff that, listen, I'm just the guy that shouts out all the numbers. This is, I'm not an expert on a lot of these things, and I've never wanted to go on that side of it. I like being on my side of the rostrum. But there are plenty of deals, of course there are. And then there's also the making the offers prior to auction, where you don't have to go and fight against everybody else for it, because you've got a lot of vendors who are very, very nervous. And as the day gets closer, so they're very confident 3 weeks prior to the auction when the catalogues just come out, but as that day gets ever nearer and that auction day looms and they're starting to panic, what's going on, Andrew? What's going on, Andrew? What's going on? And suddenly I say, well, look, you've had 3 offers at 200, and out of nowhere on this day, someone's coming at 220. I'll take it. I'll just take it. I'll take it. They would never have taken that 2 weeks earlier, but now they want to take it because they're worried what's going to happen 24 hours later in the auction room. Maybe there's a deal there. Maybe. Yes.
We got one on this side, Andrew.
Yeah.
So
this side, lovely, good. I'm getting fit up here, Vanny.
Hi.
Hi.
You said that a lot might be withdrawn because someone pops out of the woodwork that could dispute the sale, for example.
Yeah, that's just one example, yeah.
If the hammers come down and that same person pops out of the woodwork, can the sale be unravelled?
That's a great question.
And after exchange and after completion, similarly, if there's
no,
any difference?
the general rule of thumb is once the gavel's down, that's a legally binding contract between the vendor and that winning purchaser at that final bid price. And I can't even think of a situation where we've sold something and somebody's popped out of the woodwork. What we have seen once or twice, and Jay's probably got better knowledge than me of this because he sort of deals firsthand with the sort of first wave of issues that come in. There are 1 or 2 where, in fact, we've got one at the moment where the vendor just literally disappeared off the face of the earth. Disappeared. Oh, good point. Disinstructed their solicitor. So this is what's happened. Person's walked into our auction room, 325, hammer down, yay, 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 lots of dancing, everyone's delighted. The vendor's in the room and has basically decided at that moment, actually that was, I shouldn't have set my reserve so low. Well, you did, now we're in a contract. And the vendor's left and obviously taken the time to think about, well, how can I possibly wriggle out of this now? And this story unfolded as follows. They disinstructed their very reputable firm of solicitors, so we now had no one to pay the deposit over to. The solicitor says, sorry, nothing I can do. And now the buyer's saying to me, what do I do, Andrew? And in fact, this is so recent. And I even said to him, you've got 2 choices. Technically, they are legally bound to sell to you at 325, and you are legally bound to pay 325. Neither of you can walk away. It completely destroys the entire concept of a legally binding contract. So you, and I will support you in this, can go sue them. But that's going to cost you money, and you've got to go down this long potential journey trying to find a seller where we don't even know where they are. God only knows how on the ground they've gone now, and we haven't even got a solicitor to go after. So, you're going to have to hire private detectives and God knows what. And then it's going to be he said, you know what, just give me my money back. Exactly. So, which is very frustrating for us because we had an 8,000 quid fee that we then just basically lost in the blink of an eye. And, we're going to try and sue this person because the vendor still owes us. There's still an exchange of contracts just because she changed her mind. I'm delighted to say that happens not even once a year, less than once a year, and we're offering, 700 or 800 properties a year at least. So you're talking about a fraction of a percent, but yeah, technically there is a way, I suppose, of deals not happening even after they've exchanged. but very rarely, and normally it involves the buyer changing their mind. It's very rare the seller, it's normally the buyer, and the buyer will just drop their 10% deposit. The vendor then has the choice, of course, of going after that buyer and forcing them to honour their contract and stick to the deal, or they can resell the property and sue for any difference, any loss they've made from the difference in the two selling prices, or nick the 10%, have a lovely time with it, and go again and see what happens. Or keep it, whatever. Where did that come from? Some ghost-like figure, yes. No, you can't sue the auction house. I didn't make the woman disappear. No. We didn't take a hit on her. She didn't just, Yes, I suppose what you're saying is, could the buyer come after us for failing to deliver? No. In this example, the buyer was only too aware of what was going on, and we were desperately trying to help the buyer because we wanted this sale very much to go through. Unfortunately, the seller wasn't prepared to play ball and just didn't care about the legal ramifications and has literally put it. But there's plenty of buyers, by the way, who would have said, I'm not having that, I'm going after them, let's do this. And probably would win in the long term, but it's a commercial decision that a buyer's going to make.
Would the buyer go, or would the auction house?
No, the buyer would have to sue the seller. So basically, the seller and the buyer are now they're in a binding contract with one another. Okay, so we have facilitated a legal exchange, but we step back and now they talk to one another. In an ordinary purchase, the buyer solicitor, the seller solicitor start talking, they do the transaction, and now, and the title's all changed over and we say have a lovely time. Where this one would have gone had the purchaser have pursued it, we would have been very involved, of course, because we would have been assisting and giving all our file notes over and helping any lawyers get what they needed about the seller. But this particular purchaser decided not to go after the seller. I wanted them to, but he decided it wasn't worth his while, as seemed to get a resounding agreement from a chap over here. You've obviously been through that journey yourself. But I am delighted to say, I can't speak for other auctioneers, but I can tell you at Auction House London, we are talking about a microscopic fraction of the times this happened. You ordinarily will see a vendor very happy with the situation and a purchaser very happy to buy, and if one of them has changed their mind or feels aggrieved in any way whatsoever, tough. It kind of plays out. That is a binding contract, and very rarely do people try and get out of it. It's all the actions over here now.
Hi, I'm Angela Lyon.
Hi.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of people that come to you on a regular basis and say, come to your office and say, I've seen something in the auction and I'd like to take it, or buy or put a 10% on it?
Okay, so I get what you're saying. Yes, of course, we have a database of purchasers. We mail out, and we've got a sort of a rigid database of about 70,000 people, never mind all the people that see us online for a one-off and all the Rightmoves and Zoopers. A sort of a good number of those people are professionals. They are regulars, they are stock providers to us, and they're people who buy and sell for a living. And I can recognise at least two faces in this room of people we do business with regularly. They wouldn't just turn around and say, hi, can I just have some, they've got a specific idea. Okay, that's in my area. I buy very regularly in Northwest 3 or whatever it might be. You've got one in there. I'd like it. Well, what can I do on it? And then we would advise, and we would say, well, look, the vendor's expectations are around this sort of number. Were you prepared to pay that? No, I want to pay less. Well, then we'll get into a negotiation. And yeah, we will help those people like we would any random member of the public that came in for the first time, I guess.
I've got one in your auction for the 13th. I'll talk to you then.
How exciting. Why didn't you say? I would have given you a much more favourable answer. Yeah. Yeah, we can. So, which lot have you got? Okay, yes. So, as a seller, you want to buy something from me? Yeah. Have anything you want? Anything you want? Yes, sir.
Hi there. Just a quick question, really, in terms of the legal pack.
Yeah.
What is the typical content of a legal pack?
Good question.
And in terms of the legitimacy of the content, what does the auction house actually do to verify that?
Okay, so a legal pack is basically, when you buy private treaty, you will make an offer. you haven't seen any documents yet, and then the two lawyers speak, and then the seller's solicitor will give all the purchaser's solicitor a bump of information. Now, if that's a freehold property, it will be obviously things like title documents and searches and that sort of thing. And with the leasehold, it will be management information and leases and all the additional stuff as service charge accounts and whatnot. With auctions, that information is provided by the seller at the outset. So basically, at the point of instructing us, they will also put us in touch with their solicitor. The seller solicitor is then hopefully beavering away like mad, getting together all the required documentations. And those are, as I've just said, if you're buying a leasehold if you're buying a leasehold property, you want to see the leases, you want to see the accounts, you want to check that no one's in arrears and all the rest of it, if it's tenanted, and you want to see a short-hold tenancy agreements, whatever it might be. Of course, you need to see title documents if searches are provided, and they aren't always, then that will be also beneficial. What we always say to seller solicitors are that, these sort of kind of solicitors are, it always baffles me that a lawyer will say to me, what should I put in my legal pack? It's like, are you for real? Like, if you're a chef, you wouldn't ask me as a punter, what should I make in this chicken dish? I mean, this is what you do, is your job. You are the legal pack person. But what I would say is, okay, imagine you are acting for the buyer. Yes, I'm imagining this. Good. What would you expect to see? Well, I'd obviously expect to see this. No shit. That's what you put in. That's it. That's exactly what goes in. As if you're the buyer, acting for them. And so then okay, I didn't realise. So that's what goes in. Now, what do? Well, we're not lawyers. So my job and my team, yes, we're there to check that the documents are in. Invariably, the way we find missing information is not because we're going through 121 bloody legal packs. That would take us forever. What will happen is purchasers come to us and say, I'm really interested in lot 37, but I must tell you, I'm not going to bid if I don't see a copy of the tenancy agreement. Bing, there's no tenancy agreement that the vendor's put in, and it's a tenanted property. So we would ring, it's never anything underhand, it's just they haven't bothered putting it in yet. So we would then call up the seller or their solicitors and say, look, I'm sorry to trouble you, but you've not put that. Oh, okay, here it is. So that's how we would more often than not verify the contents of a legal pack and make sure it's all in hand. But if we haven't got a legal pack, which sadly happens sometimes because a vendor's solicitor has just not got their act together, and for one reason or another, and it drives me absolutely mad, they sort of deem our needs as way down the sort of pecking order, even though their client is at risk of not selling a property they probably need to sell. It is unfortunately a very common situation where solicitors just simply supply us with nothing, absolutely nothing whatsoever. And then even if I had 100 people all there, checkbooks in the air, screaming, I couldn't sell it. So we need a legal pack. The seller solicitor will determine precisely what goes in. The absolute bare essentials are title documentation, and that's about it. You can sell with the common auction conditions that we provide. You can sell without special conditions. You'd be mad, but you could. And you could literally just hand us title docs, right? And not and an EPC, of course, the EPCs, which we can ordinarily get off the internet anyway because there's an EPC register. So, but, no one's going to buy it with just that unless they're nuts. So, and you get people who are just dead keen. We get people, we just underwrote something the other day, no legal pack. So you do get people who come to us pre-auction. I can't physically stand up and auction it without a legal pack, but we can do certain deals prior to auction without one if both parties so desire. And very, very occasionally, buyers are just so desperate to get their hands on this particular property, they'll just take a view on absolutely everything. Bad idea.
Hi.
Hello.
Right. When you have a situation, or can you have a situation where between your exchange and completion, that somebody manages to get a notice or a charge onto the land registry title?
Ooh. In between exchange and completion?
Well, or even the day before you didn't know, because I understand there are some charges can go on, or some notices.
I don't think I've ever heard of one between exchange and completion. We've had plenty, sadly, of people at the last minute getting an injunction on the sale. So there will be, the classic, it turns out that somebody who's just instructed us to sell their building, it turns out they co-own it with somebody else, and that other person doesn't want to sell, and they've managed to get somehow injunct the sale at the last moment, but not post. Jay, again, will probably be able to, I can't think of a single example where something got injuncted between exchange and completion. You had the what? Oh, yeah. Okay, occasionally, very occasionally, a sale will come to a halt because it turns, it's a fraud situation. These fraudsters are just unbelievable what they're prepared to do and what lengths they'll go to. And we've had 1 or 2 examples where a completion hasn't happened and we've ended up giving all the money back because the seller was never actually the owner of the property.
So if someone had a notice of interest,
yeah.
get it on between exchange and completion, would that be...
That would be a matter for the solicitors. So just to sort of reiterate, as an auctioneers, we're not lawyers. Our job is to make a successful exchange of contracts take place on the auction day with the legal content of the legal path that's in play at that time. Once we've done our bit and the auction day is now finished, we put the 2 parties in touch with one another, and I guess there have been 1 or 2 occasions where something, as Jay's has talked about, like a fraud's come to light or whatever, and the sale has not made it through to completion through no fault of either party, and then an official rescission of contracts takes place, and then it was like nothing had ever happened. Very unusual again for that sort of thing.
Okay, so we're going to have the last 2 questions, and your question, but from last.
Just a question about when the sale breaks down, when it falls through, which is always a bad thing. When the buyer buys the property and deposits it with a check, and that check is dishonoured, do you then assign that check to the seller so they can pursue that buyer, or how do you help out?
I suppose, okay, so there's 2 things here. You're talking about a deliberate dishonouring of a check versus an accidental. So for every, and we started putting check admin fees on because we just hate checks so much, but I would say for 6 or 7 bounce checks you get per auction, 5 are just accidents. The guy or the girl didn't have the right amount in the account and they say, oh, I'm so sorry, and I'll wire it across and it's all. But yes, I guess there is 1 or 2 where the purchaser has decided, actually, I don't want, and my way out is to deliberately bounce my check. If required, we would, of course, assist the seller in whatever they would need to go after that purchaser. What tends to happen in that situation is that the seller will just say to us, can you find us somebody else at the same price? Or I'll talk to the underbidder at 1 less. So 350 was the hammer price. Would you go and see if the 349 person still wants it? Because I haven't got the patience or the time to sort of worry. If we cannot get a replacement buyer, then the seller will have their right to pursue. I don't know if I've ever been asked to pass over the check, whatever it was you just said, I forgot, sorry. God, I was rambling so much, I forgot even where I was for a second there. But, the assigning of the check. But the reality is, it happens again so infrequently that it's not really a relevant situation. Oh, really? Okay, you're that guy. Okay. Is that Ingle something? Ingle, right, yes. I think you asked me to get my lawyer to take a look at it, and he said, ask some questions. We asked the questions. I can't remember what the outcome was. We can have a chat afterwards about that, but I've got absolutely no interest in holding on to the buyer's check, believe me, and I'll be only too delighted for those to work out and go through. But you asked me to seek some legal advice. I sought that legal advice, and my lawyer wasn't quite on the same page as yours. So as with anything like that, we're obviously not just going to do what we're told by you. Anybody else?
Hi, good evening, Peter.
Hi.
3-part question. Who sets the guide price? I assume it's the auction house.
Yes.
What is there to prevent a sort of Mickey guide price being set, i.e. either too high or too low? What would happen if the vendor disagreed with your guide price and you couldn't arrive at a reserve that was within the 10%?
Okay, so the guide is, so as we say to our clients, the reserve is their price, the guide's ours. Yep. So if you're a potential seller, all you care about is obviously the lowest that we're going to drop the hammer at, and the reserve is your sort of your fail-safe. We will then set a guide based on what the agreed reserve is. So the reserve is the key figure that we start with. So a seller says, I'm not taking £1 less than 400. 400,000 say. So then we would think, okay, well, a sensible guide in that example would probably be 375 plus. And so we would look to start the bidding at around the 375 mark. So we would set the guide based on your desire for the reserve price. And it would never be more than 10% apart.
Okay, so there's no necessary connection between the guide price and any sort of market value, necessarily.
Absolutely correct. The guide price is not us telling you what this flat is worth. It is us telling you where we are most likely to start the bidding based on the vendor's expectations. And a vendor's expectations might be well below what the true market value is, because, I don't know, they're a probate company or they just don't care, they've inherited the flat, and whatever they get for it, they get for it. So yes, you will often see the final hammer price far exceeding the guide, but that's only because the reserve was set very, very competitively to ensure that it's sold in the first place.
All right, thanks.
That's a good question, yeah.
Hello there, my name's Asif. For the average person, what's the simplest, safest way to make the most money at auctions? Part one. Part two, what's the worst mistake you can make as a simple person?
Okay, well, I suppose the worst mistake you can make is to just buy blind without actually doing any homework whatsoever, no due diligence, and like that Southwood Road example, pay 100,000 for something that was clearly not worth it because it just on paper it looked like a good deal, but actually you hadn't done any of your due deal and read the fact that you had an unknown tenancy, an unknown occupant who would probably shoot you for just going anywhere near the building, and the fact that there was all these new natural lotuses which might be £5,000, they might be 500 grand, no one ever knew. So what's the worst thing you can do is buy on a whim just because you're flicking through the catalogue and you go, oh, that looks nice, boom, I'll have it. But the amount of times I've heard of people making a hell of a lot of money by doing that kind of reverses that notion as well sometimes. So, like with anything, buy something that you know what you're doing. You've come, I suppose, have some discipline when you're bidding. I shouldn't really say this because I like pushing people way past their limits. But yeah, have a little. If you can only finance yourself up to 300, don't let me force you to pay 350. That'd be a bad idea for you. But I will try. But yeah, just kind of know what your game plan is when you turn up to the auction day. How can you make lots of money? Buy cheap, sell high, I think is the general rule of thumb. There is no hard and fast way of making lots and lots of money. As a property developer or investor, that's on you. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm sure you've got your own ideas. You pick an area, become an expert, work out what's cheap, what are the up and coming areas, buy big and add as much value as you possibly can, and then instruct someone like me to sell it on for you, and we'll get you a nice profit. But that's a tough question to answer, how to make you the most money. I'll leave you to work it out.
All right.
The safest play? Crikey. The safest play is to underwrite something that you want. Do you know what underwriting is? Okay, real quick. Underwriting is where you make a pre-auction bid on a property. It doesn't get sold to you. Instead, it gets run to the room anyway, and you get to take 45% of the overage between the price that you've underwritten it at and the price that it eventually sells for. It's like an insurance policy that you can take out on a building. And we make a lot of people money using that tool. But if you are happy to own the building in the first place, rather than just be a pure gambler, you can never lose. Does that make sense? You can't lose. Imagine you want a flat of 300,000. Vendor won't sell to you at 300,000, but he'll let you underwrite it at 300,000. It ends up selling for 350. Well, you're going to get the most of 25 grand, 22,500 pounds, I think that would work out at. So you're either getting a free 22.5 grand check for doing absolutely nothing, or you're getting the flat at 300,000, which is what you wanted in the first place. That's how to win at auction. Anyone can underwrite. Elaborate,
so
please.
What we're going to do, we're just going to pause here for a second. Now, Andrew does auctions a couple of times a month, and he goes on for 6 hours. And I'm sure if we had Q&A for 6 hours, he'd easily handle that. So everyone, can you give Andrew a round of applause?
Thank you.
No, don't sit down, right? Because we're just going to have you stand back up, and you're going to stick around when it's all finished. And when you mob him, can you just try to have a little bit of space? So to make it fair, I'm going to ask this. Andrew, we'll have you on one side of the room and Jay on the other, right? Just so that you don't have everyone together, right? And you can all ask the questions, and these guys are going to stick around after the event.
I mean, if you guys are interested in underwriting, both Jay and Andrew can talk to you about that and how to get involved in the process and all the rest of it. You know, Andrew's a very modest chap, but, you know, what he calls rambling, I think we'd all agree is valuable insight into auctions, and it's a window. I mean, you hear a lot of people, particularly at this meet, who are developers and investors and play auctions, but you don't often get the opportunity to raise your hand to an auctioneer and not go away with the property and actually get a question answer. So that was a good opportunity for you guys today. I just thought I'd throw in a little auction tip around the stamp duty thresholds that we were talking about earlier. As the bidding goes up, play the stamp duty game. You know, like at every, because stamp duty is above, say, £500,000. So if you're bidding, if the bidding is going up to that point, make sure you get the stamp duty threshold as your bid. Because anyone bidding next has not just got to pay a few thousand extra, but got to kick into the next stamp duty band in their purchase. So, I mean, I've won a few bids in my day just by playing that little game. So think about all the stamp duty thresholds. There's no point having your bid at 499, because some other guy is going to get the 500 grand spot, and is probably going to win it, because sometimes people don't. I mean, what do you think about that?
You're absolutely right. When it used to be 250, do you remember when 250 used to be the kick-in? Yeah. And what would happen was you'd be climbing, and you knew what they were doing. Because exactly what you said, people wanted to be on the even numbers, and they would get themselves onto the even number. And in fact, it would get to sort of 243, and I was bouncing between two, and then one of them would just shout out 250, and you could just see the other one going, shit, I should have done that. And of course, it would sell to the 250 person, and exactly that. This is now going to kick in again on the 500s, I guess, for first timers. But it's not so relevant anymore, because of course, most of the time, it just only ekes a tiny bit more because people own more than one property. But you're right. For a first-time buyer, that would be very relevant.